So I started doing yoga when I was 14. It changed my life. I don't know. Sometimes when you just know something, it's it hasn't happened and hopefully it doesn't happen. But I had this knowing if I hadn't found yoga, I'd be a totally different person because it really is such a big part of my identity now. Being a yoga teacher, being someone that does yoga, which is pretty funny. I had developed an eating disorder and it really helped me learn how to be in my body, which was really hard. A lot of why I did drugs was to be outside of myself and not be aware, and yoga was that space for me to come back and tap into who I am and where I was.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Yo, and welcome back to another episode of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. I am your host, Bryce III.
And I am Liz McKean. And Bryce III, I missed you. We haven't recorded in a couple weeks, and I'm so happy to see your face.
It's been like a year or so.
I know, it feels like it. It really does, man.
Yeah, I don't even know who you are. Who are you?
I know, it's great to meet you, stranger. Well, I'm dressed funny today, so that's part of it.
At first I thought it was like a Red Wings hoodie or something like that. I'm like, hey, okay, all right, cool representation. That's what's up.
If you're not listening, if you're listening and not watching this on YouTube, I've got a super old school Phoenix. It looks like a hockey jersey to me, but I think it's a biking shirt. And somebody from my team gave it to me over this past week, and it felt too cool not to wear, not to sport for the pod.
That boy is actually crispy. You don't have to let me borrow that or something like that. Right?
You are welcome.
You were working
anytime.
it, Liz.
Yes, I know.
All right, who we got with us today?
Yeah, well, Honestly, I tried to do the thing where you practice in the mirror introducing our guest today, and just decided that I am not the one to introduce her. This is really, she's got too many wonderful things. I would talk for far too long, and I want her to introduce herself. So Sophie Lyons is someone that I am so grateful to know, to work with. She's one of those people like you, Bryce, that I just feel like I can't imagine my life without. And this recovery journey that I'm on is better because of her. And the work I do, the life I lead, all the things are enhanced. So to introduce her to this community is a real honor. She's a person in recovery. She's a yoga teacher, and she's so much more. So welcome, Sophie. Thank you for being on the podcast. Hey. How are you?
Happy to be here. I'm going to cry. Thank you. I was also rehearsing everything on my walk. So you know me. I go on my walks, and I was walking, and I was like, people think I'm crazy. I don't have headphones in. I'm just talking to myself.
Also, just like a heads up, tears are allowed. Feel free to let them flow if
totally
they come.
Allowed. Heck yeah. Yeah, bring them on.
I feel like I'm a bit unprepared because I didn't do any rehearsal in the mirror or walking down the street.
It's all right.
Maybe that's something I need to implement moving forward.
Maybe.
You're a natural. I don't think you need it at all. Well,
don't tell me that.
Oh, okay, never mind. Then go practice in the mirror next year. That'll be great too. We're really thrilled to have you on the podcast today. And to start off, would just love to hear how would you introduce yourself? I know that there's a lot of communities and identities that you wear proudly, and that recovery is one of them. So how would you introduce yourself? Give us your elevator.
That's such a hard question. I was having a really hard time with this. So I'm Sophie. You already said that, but I use she, her pronouns, person in recovery. Member of the queer community, and I'm a yoga teacher, like Liz said. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's really all you need to know. Being a person in recovery and being a member of the queer community are two big parts of my identity, and being a yoga teacher for sure. So that's
and we're going to dive into all of those things today.
And what I would say that the first thing that piques my interest is, especially with these things being such a big part of you, and just how broad of a term. And I'm having some of these conversations with different people, people who just want to define it further for their own individual lives, but also for marketing sake, to get people to understand what exactly is going on when it comes to the Phoenix or some of the initiatives that we're taking. So what does recovery mean to you? What does that look like to you? And what does it mean to be a person in recovery?
It means so many things. So I definitely identify as a young person in recovery. I got sober. Well, I tried to get sober when I was 21. I just turned 21. And being a person in recovery to me is eating disorder recovery, substance use recovery, which kind of go hand in hand for me. Just kind of like taking that on and like helping other young people in recovery, people in the yoga world. That's like kind of like the hat that I do, teach yoga, and like hope that helps other people in recovery. Being a person in recovery is so many different things. It's like making sure I'm eating food and taking care of myself on the day to day, and like not putting myself in situations with drugs and alcohol that would make me uncomfortable. But yeah, so many different hats, so many different things.
I think eating disorder recovery is what when I first met you, that was the entirety of how you defined recovery. So I'd love I know we have a lot of folks in this community who have had that as part of their story. That's part of my story too. And we had Erica on the podcast a few episodes ago who spoke really beautifully about that experience. But just like everything, it's different for every individual. So maybe we can start with hearing a little bit about your story there and how that led you to where you are today.
So funnily enough, most people don't know this. I have a twin sister. We are very different, but also the same because we're identical twins. The two of us, because I mean, for the majority of my life, like that was my identity, being a twin. It's so weird now that it's not a part of my identity. People are, when they find out I have a twin, are like, oh my God, I didn't know that. What's it like? And I'm like, well, it's like a weird question. Because for the first 18 years of my life, like that was who I was. Like we did everything together. We had all the same friends. And then I moved apart, and I was like, wow, I can be my own person. So when we were just starting off high school, my sister was kind of struggling with food, and like most sisters and twins specifically, like I just kind of like adapted all the patterns that she did. Like we were very inseparable, like different. Like I would say like the sassier version of me. She's a little meaner. I got a little bit of a bite to her, but she does not do yoga. She's very different in that way. And she was like able to kick it like super easily. She's a baker now, like professional chef, all those things. And like,
what is that? When you say kick it, what does that mean?
It didn't like get very bad. She like spent a few months maybe like struggling a little bit, and then like, I'm just gonna like do the thing, bake food and like eat. It's whatever.
Just like mended that relationship with food pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating to watch. And then I guess for me, like it kind of would say like just like took hold of me. I mean, you could say it like that. I definitely spent, first for like 9 years, just like struggling with food, what that looked like, and like my eating disorder, like most addictions, just like changed and evolved as like my life evolved. So it started off just like not eating, over exercising, but at the same time I was finding yoga when I was 14, and that was like a big help. But in a way, like I also just like did it way too much and exercised too much. So over the years, like it morphed into different things, the different channels. And I think for me, like it is a big part of my identity and a big part of me that I am okay with sharing, just because I think a lot of people don't necessarily talk about eating disorder recovery. A lot of people don't talk about recovery, especially how it changes. Like just like when you have one eating disorder, it can be any of them. Like when I moved to college, my roommate knew I had an eating disorder my freshman year when I lived in dorms. So I was like, all right, well, I have to eat food. So let's like throw up and take laxatives, like do other things so that I could like, sustain that. And then that's also when I started like drinking more and alone and that sort of thing. So it definitely just like evolved and changed. And I never went to treatment. Like the time when it was really bad, like my parents were going through a divorce. And so like there just wasn't a lot of like emphasis on like maybe noticing those things at home. And I like worked all throughout high school and was in a lot of after school clubs. So I just like did everything I could to like be out of the house. So they couldn't see what was happening. And it really wasn't until I found the Phoenix that I even like approached recovery. Like I thought I was recovered for years, even though I wasn't. When I got sober, I started seeing a dietitian. And that's why like they really go hand in hand for me. Like when I am using, drinking, doing any sort of drugs, like I don't eat. Like it's just like kind of like that pattern, or it gets really bad. Me, definitely, it's like, okay, like you got to stick to your routines. Like you eat 3 meals a day, every day, no matter what. And like if you do that, hopefully you stay sober. And there's like other things too. It's kind of like that sort of thing for me. They're just very tied.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that you've really, even as a person who has struggled with eating disorders over my life, honestly, I think so more people than I ever would have expected have had that experience. You've taught me so much in the way that we talk, to each other, talk to ourselves about food. You and Erica both just happen to be the people in my life that speak about this the most openly, but talking about how when you see someone, the first thing that we think to do is to comment on their appearance. And, and even as someone for whom that can be triggering, I still can find myself doing that, and so I think that's really helpful. And within this recovery community and really any community, having that as top of mind is is helpful because you're right. It is also tied together that, when we talk about creating a safe space, it's more than just not, having drugs and alcohol around. It's far more than that. And I think it's interesting that it was through that journey of eating disorder recovery that you kind of came to the conclusion that there was more to it. There was more recovering you needed to do, and substances were part of that. And that was more recent, right?
Yeah, that was like 2 years ago. Almost. I got 2 years in January, hopefully. Thanks, Bryce. I didn't want to think about it. I mean, I don't want to shit on British culture, but my parents are British, and alcoholism just runs within being British. So I didn't really question a lot of my identity with alcohol or drugs for a long time, because it was just part of the norm. I could not tell you the first time I had a drink, or how old I was, and it was just really regular within my family to drink together all the time outside of holidays and stuff. It was just whatever. So I remember it was pretty eye-opening for me when I got to college, and my roommate had never seen her parents drunk, had never been drunk before. And I was like, I thought you did that with your family. You don't, it's not normal to be drunk with your grandma. That's not a thing. So, and even my girlfriend now, she's the same thing, never seen her mom drunk. So it's super interesting for me. And I didn't really question that for a long time. And when I found the Phoenix and was trying to figure out my relationship with food, but alcohol and other drugs, I was okay, well, you spend a good part of a few years drinking a lot alone. I worked at a restaurant, and that's not normal. Smoking weed every day all the time is not normal. And other things too. But I think for me, it was you're telling yourself you need these things and you don't. And I like to think that a lot of the better part for me, my sobriety is preventative, because I have so much identification when I go to meetings. And I took a class in my undergraduate degree. I got a psychology degree, and my sophomore year, I took an understanding addictions class, and I cried every single class. That's not normal. And I just felt so much identification with everything. And the same thing when I go to meetings, and it's if you see yourself there, and I have a deep knowing within me that it could have gotten worse, or it could, who knows, and I obviously hope that it doesn't. But for me, it's kind of let's maybe stop now before it gets really bad. I'm really grateful for my life and where I am now. And I don't want to fuck it up.
So the meetings that you go to, what meetings are those? I'm curious.
I go to NA meetings.
You go to NA?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a wonderful sponsor. She's amazing.
And I think I think for me, the reason I ask these questions is just to get to understand you more as a person, because I'm just super curious.
Yeah.
So your first touch point around the conversation of recovery, was it the meetings? Was it Phoenix? Was it going to school and going to these understanding addiction classes? What was the first thing that you came across oh shit, I'm actually a part of this conversation, and I identify with what's being talked about here?
My first touch point and actually understanding that I was really a part of this community was Phoenix. I didn't understand when I was in my class that it was I was crying every day because that identification meant something. I just was oh, this is the population of people I want to work with. I just kind of left side brained it. I was let me be intellectual here. It's not look at the emotions. Then actually I went to an NA meeting because actually someone who's a Phoenix team member asked me to speak at our 90 days. She had no idea that I didn't go to meetings or anything. I just recently relapsed because I was seeing this really awful woman who didn't believe in addiction. That's a whole other story. And I went to an NA meeting, shared my story, and I was wow, this is amazing. And for me, I had a hard time in the beginning because I thought NA was for people who did harder drugs, and I just compared myself so much. Everyone was maybe I don't belong here. And it wasn't until I went to a meeting when someone shared this is Needles Anonymous. This is for everyone with all different levels of addiction. Maybe you've never done drugs, but you have a gambling addiction. You belong here. This is for everyone. When I heard that, I was okay, yeah, I belong here.
So how big of a role did your age play into your receptivity to some of the things that were talked about when you got into these rooms?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm young. There's actually a big young scene in the Boston area. There's a lot of young people in recovery around here. So I think when I started going to in-person meetings, it was easier, but like, I mean, I got clean on the screen. Like it was during COVID. Like
clean on the screen. Is that a thing that people
yes,
say?
that's what they say. So like that was definitely hard. Like you're in your bedroom. I mean, I teach virtual classes for Phoenix, but it's different when you're like at a meeting or like, you know, helping the Zoom room and stuff. So it's definitely hard to like hear people who had like 30 years and you're like, oh my God, like I can't, this person's older than I was, like longer than I've been alive. Like I can't even like fathom that. So definitely for a while it was like, do I belong here? Am I too young? And even sometimes like I think about that, like my girlfriend's sober and we talk about it a lot. She's like, are we too young? And I'm like, no, like there's nothing wrong with being sober at 23 and 24, but it is hard sometimes for sure.
Yeah, I mean because that's an experience that I had. I got sober when I was 23, 24. But I remember like just the experience of, I used to go to this liquor store. I had been buying liquor since I was like 16. And I would go to this liquor store and just get my liquor or whatever. I was about to turn 21. It was the like a month or two before my 21st birthday. And this liquor store I've been buying liquor from since I was 15, 16. I didn't have anywhere to cash my check. And so I went in there to go cash my check. It's like, I guess this is the last place I can go. And I did, and I gave my ID, and he looked at me, and I know he knew. Like, I know you had to have known I was 16. Like, you didn't care, but now that I've legally showed you a legal document, from that point on, for like a month and a half, like I had to play Hey Mister again because he wouldn't sell to me anymore. Yeah. So it's just like experiences like that are like unique to being young and dealing with some of these things. And also like stuff like those questions where it's like, yo, have I lost enough yet? Have I hit a bottom? Have I, am I too young to even know how to conceive of these things? Like, so that's why I was curious as to, how much of a role your age has played into that. And I like that clean on the screen thing too. Like,
we love a rhyme.
Yeah, that's pretty dope.
Yeah. Well, I can say as someone who, decided to wait till, late 30s, well into my 30s, you gained way more than you lost when it came to that time. And I think being able to step into recovery in youth and being able to like find yourself, in any stage, it's never too late. It's never too early. It's just right because it's yours. I'm interested for both of you. Your story about the liquor store made me think of this, Bryce. I feel like I've heard a lot more people that I know who had drugs, like substances other than alcohol as their drug of choice. Their age played a part in that because it was harder. It was easier to get hard drugs than it was to get alcohol before they turned 21. And is that true? I've heard that from a few people.
I would say, it's hard to get alcohol in Massachusetts when you're underage because they're like really strict for sure. Like, weed was pretty easy to get. And then, I did a lot of psychedelics. That was like a part of me. Was not a deadhead, but my best friend was a deadhead. So we like went to a lot of shows together. So, and it's like easy to get those when you know the right people, especially in the Boston area, just because it's like such a party. It's not like, I've like actually never been to like a college party. I was not a cool kid. It's not that's cool, but
very cool.
The cool kids for me were like the alternative people. Like I was always like a little maybe different. I was like the weird art kid. I was a band kid and techie in drama club. And when all my friends back home are going to like college parties, I was going to like basement house band shows in Alston, which is an area in Boston, like chain smoking cigarettes. Like that was where I was. And it's like easy to get alcohol there if you like know the right people or other whatever drugs you want. But it just depends on the crowd you're in, I really think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was inherently just in the crowd. Like everything was accessible to me. And then I have this, like I'm creative sometimes in the most bullshit ways. So like if I couldn't get my hands on it, I'm gonna figure out a way that I to get my hands on it. So it was
are resourceful.
I just did what I did because I did it. Like the restrictions, I think the fact that things were available to me, like once I dug in, like played a role in it. And I think also like the conversation around culture too, like I'm super influenced by hip hop. And so like I didn't do any crazy hard drugs, if we to get specific, like heroin, crack cocaine, just because of like the culture frowned upon that, right? But if, it started being cool and in the music I was listening to was like, this is what we doing and we having fun doing it and making songs about like, oh, you got to be like this when you listen to this song. Like I might have embraced it, just like now, because back when I was going crazy, like there wasn't, like lean was it was that was a down south thing, though. It wasn't as relevant as it is here. But like pill popping, I was popping pills and I was hiding it. And I felt like a leper, you know, because I knew nobody knew what this was, right? But now, like in my culture, like in hip hop culture, like Percocets and Xanax, like that's like, you're not even cool if you don't take these things. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like it evolves with the culture, I think, too.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, and it's interesting too when we talk about culture. I was thinking this when you were talking about your family being from England. So I feel like I grew up, you know, in America with a very American family, saying that one of the reasons we have so many drinking problems here is because we're not like Europe, where they just drink it when they're kids at the dinner table and it takes the excitement away from it. And if we just like made it so it wasn't such a big deal, then nobody would grow up to be an alcoholic. And it's just like, I don't know, bro. Like, I'm pretty sure it's a problem over there too. So I think there's so many, we just try to put things in boxes. We just try to like wrap our head around something and put a bow on it. And it's like, it's just always more nuanced than what we want it to be.
I was in the UK really recently visiting my family, and like some of them like don't understand like why I'm sober, or like sometimes I just am like, well, I work for the Phoenix, and it's like easier to just like use work as that kind of example. I don't really want to get into it with them, but my cousin and I were talking about that because a few of my cousins, like my parents would never let my cousins come over to visit by themselves if they were under 21, because they're like, you've been drinking for too long, like you can't come here, you're going to get in trouble. And it was Halloween weekend, and in the UK, like you can carry an open bottle and no one cares. Like it just does. I mean, it's frowned upon if you're like walking around with a bottle of wine, but like people were doing that. This woman was getting on the tube in her Halloween costume, just like chugging out of a bottle of wine. And I was like, where am I? Like, you can't do that in the States. Like many people do it, but like no one really cares. And, you know, I think like the weird thing is, or not the weird thing, but like, I think the bad thing is like people in the UK have been drinking for so long and maybe they don't go as crazy, but like, the amount of liquor that they can handle, like inherently, because it's like that's such a big thing over there. Like I remember my cousin saying, like, you know, when she came over to the States for a while, like all her friends, like the amount that they would get like drunk on,
just
she
the
could
tolerance.
like 3 times that. Like the tolerance is insane. It's not a good thing. So like alcoholism over there is definitely like just it's different. Like they're like, well, what do you mean you can handle your liquor? Like you're not an alcoholic.
It's almost like a badge of pride or something.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I would assume it's another conversation about culture as well, you know, because like I've often thought, because my uncle stay in Germany, and I know like, you know, different cultures think about these things differently, you know? So I've often thought about, okay, what happens when I'm offered a drink in the country or in a culture where like turning down a drink is almost like, oh, you don't like, is disrespectful, right? Haven't been in that specific circumstance. I've been in circumstances here in the US, but here it's just like, yo, you know, you just kind of got to respect these boundaries. Otherwise, we're not going to have fun, you know? But like, there where it's so embedded in the culture, like, are there cultures that exist where if offered a drink, like it's almost like you're shitting on their hospitality, and like how do you maneuver in those circumstances and situations? So, but I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah. I think we said this in another episode, but the antibiotics thing has worked for me in the past. I don't know whether that's good advice or terrible advice, but I've said it in uncomfortable situations and had it been blind, like just accepted without question. So, you know, and at the end of the day, you only have to share what you want to share. But I do understand what you're saying. Like I don't know what that would feel like in a completely different place where you feel like you're being disrespectful. I would say abandon everybody else before you abandon yourself is my
good rule of thumb. Good rule of thumb.
Yeah. I was thinking about what this conversation was going to look like, and something that I just deeply love and respect about you is that you are very proud in the identities that you've stepped into, and that is, you know, recovery, that is queerness, that is yoga teacher, that is, you know, there's so many areas, and I know that Bryce and I have had conversations, and Bryce is a person who tends to say, you know, I am not going to be held to any specific label, you know. And for you, I feel like that's an area that you found community in and safety in. And also it's almost like that's a way that you break down stigma is by saying, this is who I am and I'm really proud of it. And you invite others in to be part of that as well. So I would just love to talk about that, like these different areas that you identify as. And I also have known you to change your mind about things. Like you won't be held by something, you know, if something stops feeling right, you absolutely are strong enough to say this doesn't serve me anymore, and that's very cool. So If you, that's not even a really question,
No,
but I
got
thought
it.
might be something cool for you to talk about.
No, I love that. I think I want to touch base more on like being queer because I think that's one I can probably touch on a little bit more and maybe other people will understand. I think for recovery, like it depends on like where I am. Like it's funny, like with teaching Phoenix classes, it's like such an integral part of like introducing myself. Like Sophie, she, her pronouns, person in recovery. And sometimes I go to teach like non-Phoenix classes and I like almost I'm like person don't need to share that here. I don't need to tell my yoga class of 20 people that I am in recovery. They're gonna be like, why is she sharing that? I think it like that part of me, it depends on the spaces that I'm in. I think at Phoenix and in meetings, like I'm proud to be who I am. And I think it's taken me a little bit to like get there and understanding like what that means to me and like how everyone's story is different. For a long time I was like, maybe like that's not me, maybe I need to like understand that. I told Liz this once, actually. It's just like funny, and I just think it's a funny part of like a Phoenix experience I've had. When I first started volunteering to teach for the Phoenix, there's a Emily who's in Boston. Like I was like, Emily, like I think people respect me here because I have a lot of tattoos and I know I've made a lot of mistakes. And she was like, no, it's because you're in recovery, you idiot. I was like, oh.
Sophie walked in thinking she had street cred.
Yeah, I got all these tattoos. Like I'm cool, and I think that like is something that I thought of, which I think is funny because I think like not that everyone in recovery that has tattoos, because not everyone does. A lot of people do. You know, I think of. I mean, I love getting tattoos, but it's also like in a different sense, like a form of it can be self-harm. So that's like an interesting topic. But in my identity with like being queer, I try to be, and I'm really open about it because there are so many people who can't be open about their identity. And I think it is important for people who are safe and able to be openly queer, however they identify as a part of that community, to be open so that the younger generations of people who can't be, or maybe the older people who can't be, can see them and be like, wow, like I want to do that, or like I wish I could do that, or maybe it gives them, or they might feel empowered to then be open if they can be. So I think in terms of that part of me, it's just important for me to like be open like that. I mean, I live in a really safe area like Boston, super queer and it's super liberal. So like I am safe to be myself, to hold my girlfriend's hand in public and that sort of stuff. So I think where I am, it's safe. And the people I'm around, like my roommates also queer. Most of my friends are queer. And like I'm really lucky to have that experience. So for me, it's like being who I am and like hopefully empowering younger people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community to like be themselves or feel empowered to be who they are, even if they can't come out because of the situation that they're in. So that's like important to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, in that community, really, you know, and I'd say a large amount of marginalized communities, but, you know, substance use runs rampant because you're just trying so hard to mute that part of yourself. You're trying so hard to not feel like, you know, the pain that happens when you're not able to be fully yourself, or maybe who you are isn't accepted by the people that you love.
And I think also like as someone that is like a cis person and is like straight presenting, like unless someone knows or sees me and my girlfriend or whatever, they're not going to know that I'm gay. And that's like the same thing with pronouns. Like pronouns are important, not because you need to share, but it like as a cis presenting person or someone who is straight and someone who identifies as she, her, he, him, like who might not be trans, if you use your pronouns, then that person might be like, oh, this is a safe space for me. Like, it's not really about you. It's about like being like, this is a space where you're able and openly to be who you are. So I think also for me as like a cis white woman, it's really important to name my power and privilege and be like, hey, like, I know that I look like this, but like, this is who I am. So it's like tying in those intersections of identity, just because like, I know for me that like being queer is a big part of who I am, but maybe someone who like my girlfriend, like she's Mexican, Jewish and queer, and like being Mexican and Jewish is way more of her identity than being a queer person. So it like depends.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think that's a really important thing to talk about and also to create spaces for, because, you know, being part of that community within the recovery community can, you know, because even you walk into, I think we tend to think recovery community, like everybody knows each other or something. I've literally been in a different state and been like, told someone that I'm sober and like, oh my gosh, my aunt's, you know, second cousin is sober. Maybe you know them, you know, and it's like, no, we don't know. There's not a network. It's just as, you know, a big, giant group of different kinds of people as any community, as the whole wide world. And just like when we are people in recovery, as much as we are out there in the whole wide world, sometimes it's really nice to be in a room and in a conversation where everybody else has shared that experience, and you can like tell stories that might horrify a person who hasn't had those experiences. I think same as if you are a person who is in the LGBTQIA plus community, that to be able to be in a group of folks that have that, share that identity, share the recovery experience. There's just a different level of safety in the way that you can share yourself. And I know you've created some of those spaces within our community, which is incredibly cool.
And so before we get to Liz's very special question, I did want to kind of like, since we're talking about like some of the spaces you've created and instructing, and I know the form that you had sent in, just one of the things that you wanted to talk about, had used the word catalyze around yoga and how it helped catalyze your recovery. And so that piqued my interest, and I'm curious as to what that means to you. How did yoga help catalyze your recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was on my walk talking to myself, I had this like moment where I was like, holy shit, I've almost been doing yoga for 10 years, which is crazy. So I started doing yoga when I was 14, found a studio in my hometown, and it like changed my life. I don't know. Sometimes when you just like know something, it's like it hasn't happened and hopefully it doesn't happen. But I had this like knowing, it's like someone says that and I can't remember. But I had this knowing like now that I do that, like if I hadn't found yoga, I'd be a totally different person, because it really is such a big part of my identity now, like being a yoga teacher, being someone that does yoga, which is pretty funny because I started doing it like at such a young age. Like I was in high school and had developed an eating disorder, and going to the studio they went to was not very like Western yoga. It was like a very homey studio I was the youngest person that practiced there by far. And like everyone was so different and like different bodies, different ages, just everyone. And it really helped me learn how to be in my body, which was really hard. Like a lot of why I did drugs was to be outside of myself and like not be aware. And yoga was that space for me to like come back and like tap into who I am and where I was. So for the first few years I did yoga, it was just like, it was a space that I could like be outside of my house where things were kind of chaotic and like be in a safe place. Like I worked at the studio, like I didn't have to pay for yoga, I could not afford it. And so that was really a special place for me. And I actually was supposed to go to college for photography. That's what I got into school for. And the only reason I came up to this Leslie in Boston is because I had a holistic psychology program. I was like, oh, they have a class called Yoga for Emotional and Mental Health. That's really cool. And a weekend, I switched my entire major. Like I was in the photography department. I took this class on, it was like something about mindfulness and something, holistic approach to healing. It started with a 5-minute meditation. I cried and I changed everything. Like it was like, that was like the moment for me where I was like, okay, like this is what I want to do. And although when I moved up here, like couldn't afford to do yoga, like, I mean, yoga classes now 5 years later cost like $30 a class. And like, I didn't have a job. I was like in school full time, and I like didn't go to do yoga for like a year. I mean, I did it on and off. Like I tried to go to classes, and not having that, like just like such a big part of myself, like my outlet for a year, like really like was not good for me. I was not the same person. Liz heard this last week, but I cut all my hair off. I had a short bob, was platinum blonde, and I like wanted to be really punk. Like I wore Doc Martens every day, and I was like dating this skater guy. Before I got sober, I was not out. Like I didn't really know who I was. Like I came out in high school and like went back in the closet. When I didn't have yoga, like it was like a really weird time. Like I drank a lot alone. I was working in a restaurant full time, which I hated. And that summer I actually did my yoga teacher training when I was like not well at all, which is really funny to think about. Like looking back now, I was like, probably should have done that at a different time, but it was like the time it needed to be. And like going to my yoga teacher training, although I like didn't do treatment or anything, like going there was like almost treatment for me, because like walking into the door, I was like, all right, like you got to stop taking laxatives. You can't throw up anymore. And like, you have to eat. And so like I went to Kripalu where I did my yoga teacher training, and I like stopped doing all that stuff, which is wild now that I think of it. Graduated my yoga teacher training, and like still wasn't like the healthiest, and was still doing a lot of things that I shouldn't be doing, but it really helped me like just like try to be a better person. Yeah. And then I was just teaching yoga. So like yoga was such a big part of my healing journey. I would say catalyzes, which is such a big word, catalyzed my recovery journey, because it just helped me learn how to be myself and be in a body. And still now it's the same thing. Like when I take a class, it's like that moment, or when I teach a class, like I just want other people to like be able to find agency in their bodies and like know that like it's okay to be where they are. Like it's not about working out or doing the hardest thing, but just about being. So I don't know if that explains it, but
well, no, I think it definitely does. And I appreciate you for sharing that with us. And there's also like this phenomena that I'm realizing as you share, and just in my own life and how important I'm realizing that storytelling is. And the most important story that we'll ever tell ourselves is the story of us.
Mhm.
And quite a bit do I do reflection and have epiphanies, sort of like I'm kind of seeing on your face right now, which was kind of crazy that would happen then, which was kind of wild that would happen then. It's crazy. I wasn't that well, but it was the perfect time that it was. And so like the hindsight, which I know when we tap into life, like we can tend to do a little bit less because it's like, okay, especially somebody who is prioritizing, being present. And so, but that hindsight allows for us to have a bit of context as to how we got to where we are and who it is that we are. And doing that reflection, telling that story, continuing to evolve the way that we tell that story and the connotation of that story is a big part of us getting to understand ourselves as well as the context in which we fit in the world. And so I appreciate you sharing that story in public. And I appreciate you sharing your process as you share the story, because that allows for me to kind of look and reflect myself. And also, I think like maybe a bit of sharing your story probably was for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I've not always been like that. It's so cheesy, but really, like, I'm a super vulnerable person. Like, I'll talk to anyone about my shit. Like, I'm like, you want me? I'm not going to like unload on you, but I think like it's important to share your story with anyone that is wanting to listen or wanting to hear it, just because it just like in meetings and in recovery, like you don't know who's going through the same thing or who needs to hear what you're saying. I mean, when I was a kid, and still not, like I've got anxiety and like always have, and like I was always cared what other people thought. Like it was like, I don't want to go to the bathroom in class in school because I'm scared that someone is going to make fun of me for going to the bathroom. Like, what? Like, that's wild. Like, but that was me, like a very type A, like always like tried to like do the right thing. And now that I'm older, I'm still a baby, as everyone would say, but I am trying to care less about what other people think and like just like, this is your story, like share it. Like it's okay if like you feel silly or like whatever, but like I'm trying not to like be so self-deprecating and like make jokes about myself and just like own it, because like it's who I am. And like if someone wants to be like, well, you don't belong here because you didn't do X, Y, and Z, or you're too young, then like that's their own shit. It's not mine.
You get to decide where you belong.
Exactly. So.
Well, you've inspired me in a lot of ways, and just showing up and being exactly who I am, because you model that, and you do it even when you do it with a laugh, and when you feel silly, and like you're able to, like the way you do the self-deprecation it doesn't feel ever to me like you're putting yourself down. It's more just an acknowledgement of like how you feel in the moment doing it. And that makes it even easier, I think, for other people to feel empowered to do it too. So there's a reason that you're a leader in this. And I think most communities that you're part of.
Yes, Sophie, you are a beacon of light. And so I kind of want to switch things up today, because for the sake of variety. So I think I want to ask the question, Liz. Let me ask the question.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wait. Then I get to lead up.
Are you
going
to pry me? Okay.
Right.
All right.
I need to hear your fabulous, wonderful, groundbreaking, life-changing, amazing, beyond all comprehension question that no one could ask like you. And go.
Now that we've had a reversal of roles, how fun that is, and how challenging it is to come up with new adjectives and verbs every time.
There's a lot of words.
Yes. So Sophie, if you could look back at any previous iteration of yourself from who you are today to give advice or kind words or anything to you in the past, what would you say to that person? What would you say to previous Sophie?
It's so hard. I've been thinking about this all day. Well, not all day. I actually didn't think of this earlier, but what just came to mind was stop walking on eggshells. Take up space. I think I spent a lot of my life just like making myself small. And I still do that sometimes. And most people in my life call me out on it just because it's like kind of my go-to space. So I think for me, it's just like telling my younger self to take up space, take up as much space as you want, and like be yourself. And don't walk around thinking that like you're going to get in trouble. Just be you. That was my kind of go-to space. Yeah.
That's deep, actually. That's very
you get
deep.
it. You get it. Yeah.
Touch my heartstrings with that one.
When I was going to therapy for the first time, the question. They always ask you like a questionnaire, and it was like, what do you want to work on? I don't want to walk on eggshells anymore. And that's like all I said. And the therapist was like, are you okay? Yeah, just, things to work on.
Well, this has been really fun. Thank you for being here, Soph. It's always fun to. I'm lucky enough to be able to spend time with you pretty much every day, but it's never enough because I love being around you, and I'm excited for the community to hear more of your light. And where else can the community get more of you?
On the virtual platform. I teach 3 classes a week on Zoom, on the Zoom land. Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a restorative class. You roll on the floor for an hour. Monday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern, I teach a kind of more strong flow. And Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, yoga. All the things.
And how much do those classes cost?
They're free as long as you're 48 hours sober, whether you're a person in recovery or not. All are welcome.
And we'll link those specific classes in this podcast episode. So if you want to tap in with Sophie and actually do a yoga flow with Sophie, you'll be able to.
Which I highly recommend. Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you think, Bryce? I think we did it.
I think we did it. I think this was the best episode ever to get back into the groove of things. I know that you all listening continue to get episodes every week. But us on the back end, sometimes we take breaks because there's things that happen in life that we got to tend to. And so it is cool to come back, and it's even better to come back with your energy, Sophie. I think this was the perfect episode to kind of, start to rev the engine back.
Thank you.
And I got to say, I think like on a personal note, so we've never we've crossed paths, but we never really kicked it like that.
No.
But I got to say about your energy, there's some people in the world where it's just like, oh, that's my friend. We haven't even kicked it yet for real. But I was like, oh, hey, Sophie's my friend, So I look forward to kicking it with you more. I'm sure we'll cross paths, and when we do, maybe we'll grab a bite to eat or something like that, and discover how much of friends we really are.
I love that. I feel the same way about you, Bryce.
Hey.
I love it when my favorite people come together. What a great day. Well, thank you. Thank you both for being here, being in my life, being part of this really fun thing we get to do on microphones, which is just have conversations we'd want to have anyways. Thank you, everybody who's listening, whether it's your first episode ever or you come every week, we're so beyond grateful and just honored to be able to have these conversations with you. I hope that you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode in the future. We're here every single week. If you are called to rate and review on whatever platform you are listening on, that really helps so that we can find some more, or so this podcast can find more people. If you need help figuring that out, how can they get to us, Bryce? How can they talk to us?
when you download that app and you go on the app, there's these groups, and there's groups for all type of interests. I recently joined a plant group, and I'll be posting my plant babies in there pretty soon. So there's a lot of interest that you could tap into. But for us, the listeners of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, there is a group specifically for us. And it's called the Rise, Recover, Live podcast group in the app. So join that and come and talk to me and Liz and everybody else in the group, all 900 Phoenix team members in the group that are discussing their favorite parts of episodes, their favorite episodes, what they like to hear more of, what they like to see. And that'll help us to build a better relationship with you all, because this is our show. Let's do this thing in collaboration and in love. So I hope to see you in there. Come talk to me. Come say what up.
Yes, definitely. Well, we will see you in the group, and we will see you here, same time, same place. See you next time.
Till next time.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you, or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.